Hello, another inspirational short story. This one's called Full Circle. And there's a short visualisation to begin with. So if you like, you can sit comfortably and shut your eyes or keep your eyes open, whatever you wish. Imagine that you're approaching a huge castle. It's very imposing, and in its day, it would have been the most magnificent castle in the whole kingdom, fit for a king. In fact, a king did live there. Now, because this is Storyland, you can walk right past the guards and into the castle. And you walk into this room and see big, huge tapestries on the wall. So go up and examine one of them. Feel its texture. It's thick, smells a bit musty. And because this castle belongs to the king, where money is no object, notice that it's woven with gold thread, and it depicts the scene. And there are other tapestries, probably to keep out the draughts. And talking of draughts, the castle's quite cold, but towards the end there's a big fireplace and a roaring wood fire, and you can smell the wood smoke. Walk up to the fire, and as you get nearer, you get warmer and warmer, and sit down near the fire. Making yourself comfortable, look into the flames, the dancing yellow and red flames, and the black shapes that form when you stare into those flames. And listen to this story about a king. Now, the king lived in a castle just like this, and he was a little bored, and he would look out of his window, because in those days it was like there was a town almost in the castle grounds and outside the castle. And people would trade, and there would be animals, and there would be lots of comings and goings. And he would look at all this busyness, and he would wonder, what's it like to be a poor person? Are they any happier? And often he would muse on this. And then one day he decided he was going to do something about it. And so he shaved off his beard, and he put on an old tunic with a hood, and he left the castle. And his disguise was so good that nobody noticed who it was. Now, as he left the castle grounds, it occurred to him that in order to do the job properly, he needed to forget completely that he was a king. And he'd heard tell of an old lady in the woods who weaved spells and potions. And so he asked around, and he found where she lived. And he knocked on her door and put in his request. Could she find a potion to help him forget who he was? Now, it has to be said that she was a little hesitant to do this, and made absolutely sure that he knew what he was doing. But he was adamant. Very well, she said, and she gave him the potion. And when he left her hut, sure enough, he'd forgotten completely who he was. Well, wandering around, he soon discovered that he needed a name, so he called himself Edric. And the first thing he had to do, for he had no money, was find some work. Now that was easier said than done, because the king had led a very sedentary life, and he wasn't used to any kind of manual labour. But he found the odd thing here and there. But pretty soon he realised he wasn't really making enough to keep body and soul together. And what's more, it was very confusing not knowing who he was. And when people questioned him, he had to think quite quickly. Well, he would knock on farm doors and trudge around, and as time went on, he began to learn how to do certain things. But it was very hard, and he often didn't have enough to eat. He watched the other poor people, and some of them foraged, and he learned a bit about some of the berries he could eat and the plants. But life was very hard, and he was often hungry. And then he hit on an idea. Everyone had wood fires, and so he bundled up sticks of wood and took them to market to sell. Now, things were going very well until the person who ran the market came up to him and said, "Oi, who are you?" My name's Edric," said Edric. "Have you got a licence to sell?" "A licence?" he said. "Don't you know? According to the king's edict, everyone has to have a trading licence. Now, you need to go and petition the king." "Well, good luck with that, because apparently he's vanished. Anyway, be off with you if you can't produce a licence." Poor Edric had to leave. So much for that enterprise. He wandered on, knocking on doors, trying to find work. One day he was so hungry, he came across an orchard, and in this orchard were big, juicy apples. And he reached up and he got this big red and green apple, and he put it in his mouth, and the juice ran over his fingers. It was delicious, but it hardly slated his hunger. And so he reached up to get another one, and at that point this loud voice said, "Oi, what do you think you're doing?" And he jumped up in alarm. "Oh, I was... Don't you know that only the king and his guests are allowed to eat apples?" "Oh, they look so delicious. I was just hungry." "I dare say they do. Well, this is my livelihood, and you are a common thief. How come you didn't know?" Well, I'm a stranger in these parts," said Edric. "A stranger? Don't you know the king has ordered that no strangers are to come into the kingdom? How did you get here?" "Oh, I don't know," said Edric. Now, believing the man was probably a simpleton, he shooed him off and told him that if he came back he would report him as a common thief. Well, Edric left as fast as he possibly could. Now, it had been many weeks and months since he'd left his castle, and Edric's beard had grown long. His hair was all bedraggled and unkempt. His shoes had holes in them. His clothes were ragged. He looked like a vagabond. And so whenever he asked anyone for work, he was often chased off with dogs, or just told to clear off. He was really hungry. His face was gaunt with hunger. And he just wandered on, drinking from streams, eating berries, whatever he could find. And one evening, he collapsed by this wall. He barely knew where he was, and he fell into a deep sleep, only to be woken roughly by someone shaking his shoulder. "Oi, you! Don't you know the king has ordered that no one is to be near the castle after dark? He woke up. The king again. Now, was there something about the way he looked, the way he spoke, or the birthmark on his cheek? But the guard had a kind of hunch and helped him to his feet. And he had to drag him, for poor Edric was half dead. And he dragged him into the castle and called on the chief advisor. Now, from that moment on, Edric's fortunes changed. He was given clean clothes. He was given food, water, a nice soft bed to lie in, and he was nursed back to health. And as the days passed, and he got stronger and put on weight, there was no doubt in anyone's mind who he was. He was their lost king. The problem was that Edric didn't know it. And so they called for the old lady from the woods. And when she entered the king's chamber, she said, "Well, well, full circle. As it happens, I have a potion that will help you remember." And no sooner had he drunk the potion than he realized who he was. And the following day, he repealed all the edicts, all the acts, all the instructions that he'd issued, including the one about strangers entering the kingdom. And so people flocked from far and wide into the kingdom, where they all flourished. And now, getting up from your chair near the fire, moving away from the fire, make your way out of the castle. And with every step, you can remember who you are, where you're sitting, and what day it is. And if you liked that story, please click the thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and maybe share it. And leave a comment below, because I love to hear what you think of these stories. And if you would like my free PDF on how you too can use stories, then click on the link below. Thank you very much for listening.